Okay, so now we have the center of our pattern, we have the center of our cloth. We can start stitching. But before you do that, I neglected to tell you to mark the top in some way on your cloth. Once you find the center, I used a permanent marker and I made it very small. It has to be small because I'm going to sew this into a quilt and my seam allowance is only going to be 1/4 inch, so I don't want anything sticking out past that. So you can even do a little stitch if you don't want to use any kind of a pen or marker or anything, just so that you know, because sometimes when you just have a few stitches and you might get confused as to where you were if you pick it up the next day. Okay, so we decided that I was going to start in this row here, these 6 stitches. So these stitches start 1 below and 1 over from the center. So my center is where that little fuller hole is, right there. So I'm going to start 1 over and 1 down from the center. So I'm starting right there. Now in cross stitch, we do not use knots, mostly because knots can be bulky. So I'm going to show you how to anchor your thread without tying a knot. So I'm going to pull my thread through and leave a little tail on the back. So about that much. Okay, so there we have our first stitch. Then I'm going to cross over and make the first leg of the cross. Pull that through. And there's my first part of the first stitch. Then on the back side, I'm stitching in this direction, so I want my thread tail to go in that direction. Just like that. So I'm going to put the needle down in the next hole over, pulling it through, not too tight, but snug. And then I'm going to make my second cross there. And all the while on the back, I'm going to keep my tail tucked under my stitches on the back. This is the most fiddly part, actually, keeping that tail tucked in there. And I need to do 6 of these stitches because that's what it said on my chart. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the last one. And then I'm going to come back in this corner here, right below like I did before, as if I was going to take another stitch. But I'm done stitching to the right. So now I'm going to come back and go in each corner on the upper left and cross all these stitches with the other leg of the cross stitch. Now, sometimes your thread will get a little bit tangled. So what I do is every 3, 4, 5, however many stitches, or when you notice your thread is starting to get twisted, I hold the whole project up and I let my needle dangle. Sometimes I'll even separate the folded part and let that untwist. And then I just gather it back together. And my needle is untwisted. Okay, so now the next part, the next row, I'm going to go up. So as you can see from my row here, this is the row that I just did. And sometimes if you find it helpful, you can color in the row that you just did with a little colored pencil or something, especially when you're first starting. So you know those are done and you know where you are in your design. So now I'm going to come over 2 blocks, 2 squares, and start this row of 5. So we'll do that now. Let me find my needle here. So I'm going to count over 2 squares in the row above, and I'm going to take 5 stitches across here. There's my 5 going to the right, and then I'm going to come back in this lower right corner again, but this time cross over each stitch to the left. Okay, so now we'll see what our next step is. I'm going to color in these 5 that I did. Again, I'm going to go 2 over above and do 5. Okay, so let's try that. So 2 over. And 5 stitches. 3, 4, and 5. Now I can see that my thread is starting to get a little twisted, so I'm going to let it fall from my needle, fall from my fabric like that. Let it untwist. That just makes your stitches look a little nicer because the thread isn't twisted, it's a little fuller. And you kind of want that stitch to fill in the whole square, which is why you don't want to tug too hard either when you're stitching, because you don't want to make it super tight. You don't need to pull, just pull the needle through until you feel a little resistance. And the thread should lay down nicely right on top. Okay, so now we have 3 rows. I want to show you what it looks like on the back. This is where we originally anchored our thread. So you'll want to take a little pair of scissors and clip the end of that thread right at the end of that row. That way it makes it neater on the back. There's less mess and maybe showing through to the front. Okay, so now what I'm going to show you is how to end your thread. Okay, I'm going to be done stitching green for now, just for the example. So you're going to turn to the back and you're going to run your thread under a few stitches, and then going in the same direction, I run it under, I loop it. So it's coming out there. I'm going to run it under this stitch again and run it under a few more. And then go back under a couple. And then trim my thread. That's not going to come out. And it's nice and flat. There's no knots. Okay, so then on my pattern, on my pattern, I'm going to cross off that I did these. And what I'm going to start next is I'm going to show you how to start a new thread or a new color. I'm going to do these 4 stars over here. Stars on my pattern. Say they're dark yellow. So I have my yellow already threaded on my needle here. Oops. And that starts right next to, on my pattern, my 5 hearts. So I want to start right there. You can kind of, if you need help, just poke your needle through and that'll orient where you want to start on the back side. So I want to start right here. So I'm going to run my thread just like I did with my green. And I'm going to pull it through just to the end. I'm going to loop it under that one again and go to the end. Oops. Oh, let's take that out for a second. I don't know what happened there. I don't think my threads were even. So I'm going to take that out. Let's make sure my threads are even on the end. If they're not, just clip them. All right, let's try that again. So this is my top. I want to start right there. So I'm going to loop it under a couple. Take it to the end. Loop it under. And come backwards. So now my thread is going to be coming out exactly where I want to start. So I won't be traveling anywhere with it. And then we're going to do the exact same thing we did before, which you probably don't need to see again because you know how to do this already. We're going to take 4 stitches to the right and cross them over to the left. But I did want to show you how to start a new piece of thread. This yellow is a little harder to see. I suppose I could have better lighting. It's getting a little cloudy outside. I didn't want to turn on my overhead lights because I was worried about the shadows. So there's my 4 stitches to the right. I'm going to cross them to the left. Oops. And then once again, I'll show you how to finish off. Go under a couple stitches, loop through 1 or 2, and back again, and clip. So that's how you do that.